Is it recording?
Yes.
Okay. All right, guys, we're going to go over some of these structures on the heart. So we know that the heart's a muscular organ, and it's going to have some internal chambers on the inside. So we'll have the atria, which are these two superior chambers. We'll have a right atrium and a left atrium on the right side and left side of the heart. Okay. Now there's two inferior chambers. Thank you. We have the right ventricle and the left ventricle. These are the chambers. So right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Okay. Now these chambers receive blood in different ways, and we'll start with the right atrium. So the right atrium receives venous blood from superior vena cava, which is right here. Superior vena cava drains blood from your head, your neck, and your upper extremities. It also receives blood from inferior vena cava, which is right here. So that's inferior vena cava. Now it receives, which drains blood from the lower extremities and abdominal organs. Now the right atrium also receives blood from one other area. Now it's going to be hard for me to point to this, but if you look in there on the inside of the atrium, number 83, there's a little blue circle right superior to that. That's called the ostium of the coronary sinus. And the coronary sinus drains venous blood from the heart itself back into the right atrium. Now we can see the ostium, or the opening of the coronary sinus, in the right atrium. And we can actually see that the main part of the coronary sinus, why is it doing that? There we go. Back here, so that blue enlargement there, that's coronary sinus, which is the convergence of your coronary veins all into one large structure. Right there, coronary sinus. It's going to drain into your right atrium. Okay, so the right atrium receives blood from those three areas. Now, on the external side of the heart, we actually can see some different structures like the vagus nerves. So all these little yellow lines on the outside of the heart, those are vagus nerves. If you guys remember, vagus nerve is cranial nerve number 10. It's the main parasympathetic nerve for your body. And so the heart has parasympathetic nervous innervation too from the vagus nerve, which actually slows your heart rate down. Okay, so your heart's directly innervated by the vagus nerve, which are all those little yellow lines on there. Now, surrounding the outside of the heart, we'll have a serous membrane. We can't really see that here, but there would be a serous membrane surrounding the outside of the heart, which is the serous pericardium. And the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, which is right on the heart itself, that's called epicardium. So it would be right on the heart itself. That's epicardium. Okay. Now, if I open up this wall of the heart here, you can see a little layer of red there. That's myocardium, which is basically a heart muscle or a cardiac muscle. Okay, that's myocardium. Now, lining the inner surface of the heart chambers, both the atria and the ventricles, we'll find a tissue here lining the inner surface. That's called endocardium. It's a simple squamous epithelium that actually lines those internal chambers. So this white layer here is endocardium. Okay. Now, if I open up these chambers again, you guys can see some other structures. So we know that the atria and the ventricles are separated by atrioventricular valves, which are here. So this flat part there, from my fingers, those are the atrioventricular valves. They prevent backflow of blood into the atria while the ventricles are contracting. So when the ventricles start contracting, these AV valves close. Okay. Now, one of the ways that these AV valves stay closed is that they're anchored to some other muscle through these little fibers here called chordae tendineae. So these chordae tendineae actually attach to muscle called papillary muscle. And papillary muscle you can see an example of right here. So papilla means nipple, so apparently it looks like a little nipple. So right there in front of my finger, that sort of nipple-shaped structure, that's a little bit of papillary muscle. Now, on this model, the chordae tendineae aren't actually attached to the papillary muscle, but like in a real heart, these chordae tendineae would be connected to that papillary muscle. Yeah. Now, we're also going to have some semilunar valves, which we can see really well right here. If I rotate this way, these are the semilunar valves. So this semilunar valve here, if we follow it back to see where it's attached, we'll find that it's actually associated with the right ventricle, which means this is the pulmonary semilunar valve because the right ventricle is associated with pulmonary circulation. So this semilunar valve here prevents backflow of blood from the pulmonary trunk back into the right ventricle. That's the pulmonary semilunar valve. Now this valve right here, that's the aortic semilunar valve. And if you follow that back to where that came from, it actually came from the left ventricle. It's up in there. I don't know if you guys get the right angle, but that's the aortic semilunar valve. It prevents backflow of blood from the aorta back into the left ventricle.
Because this is the aorta, right? Up here?
Yep. In fact, let's close this back up and I'll show you guys these. So, this here is the pulmonary trunk, which is the vessel that carries blood from the right ventricle out towards the lungs. In fact, the pulmonary trunk splits into two pulmonary arteries, which we can see here. If I rotate this like this, so here's the pulmonary trunk, you guys. It'll split into a right pulmonary artery and a left pulmonary artery. So right pulmonary artery, left pulmonary artery. And those are branches of the pulmonary trunk. Okay. Now, the aorta just sits just posterior to the pulmonary trunk, and it's this large artery here. In fact, it's the large artery that emerges out of your heart. It's part of the systemic circulation. So the left ventricle will pump blood through the pulmonary aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, and the aorta is going to carry blood out to the rest of the body. Now, two things I forgot to mention that we can see on here as well. We have some septa, things that separate these chambers. So this layer of heart muscle here, separating the right ventricle from the left ventricle, this is called the interventricular septum. Remember, this is where the bundle branches are going to proceed down until they branch at the apex and then come back up around the lateral parts of the ventricles as the Purkinje fibers. Okay. Another thing I forgot to mention, you guys, is something called trabeculae carneae. Trabecular is just like a network. Carneae just means meat. So trabeculae carneae is this muscle right here, you guys, where if it's not papillary muscle in the ventricles, it's called trabeculae carneae. So all this muscle right there, it's not papillary shaped, so that's trabeculae carneae.
And that's only in the ventricles.
Only in the ventricle, exactly. Good. And oh yeah, one thing I forgot to mention to you guys. Coming back from the lungs to the left atrium, these four red vessels there, these are the pulmonary veins. And they're going to carry oxygenated blood from the lungs back into the left atrium. And that's it.